Yeah, so my partner Jeff and I, really had to take a look at our business model because we've had to make adjustments coming through the pandemic where we've had to cancel or postpone events. Coming back to a reality where we won't have fans in attendance. So we've lost a lot of revenue, but the time down has given us an opportunity to take a look at our business model and make some adjustments. And the key for us is just going to be delivering amazing fights that are well produced, and we'll let the rest take care of itself.
When you return on May 29th, will it be over at Extreme Action Park in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale?
No, and unfortunately they're still closed, and I don't know exactly how long they will be. I don't know if they've gotten official guidance yet. But also, if we can't have fans in attendance, it may not make sense for us to be there. So, we're looking at what our other possibilities are. I've got several lined up that I think are going to make sense. I think what you're going to see from Titan is we're borrowing a page from Dana White and the UFC with Dana White's Contender Series. So we're going to limit the number of bouts we put on. We're going to have 6 bouts. They're all going to be amazing fights, focused on young upcoming talent, also including some really established former champions and champions that will be competing for us. And we're just going to focus on 6 fights and really deliver some great shows. We're going to produce those things well, and but we're going to do it on a little bit more intimate setting, so that we won't be in a big venue. It'll just be, it'll be very similar. If you've seen Contender Series, it'll be that very similar feel.
And as you mentioned, and UFC restarted last week, and they're now in Jacksonville, in Florida, North Florida, right. And no fans in attendance. How do you prepare for something like that? How do fighters prepare for something like that? Or is it just business as usual?
Listen, I think that you have to be cognizant of potential changes, but the reality is, in our sport, the beauty of it is, once the cage door shuts and is locked, competition is going to be what it's always been, which is 2 fighters, engaged in a back and forth exchange, trying to impose their will. So really, everything else is superfluous at that point. The things leading up to it certainly have an impact, and there will be a restriction on the number of corners that will be in attendance at the event. Typically, for a non-title fight, our athletes are entitled to 3 corners. For a title fight, they're entitled to 4. In this scenario, everybody's going to be limited to 1, just because we're under strict guidelines to limit the number of people that we have in attendance. So, there's going to be some adjustments from that perspective. But honestly, once, we get to the fighting and the first punch is thrown, then, we're business as normal. I'm going to be producing a show that's got great fights, and our fighters are going to be going in there, laying it all on the line. These kids are all hungry to get back to fighting and working. This is, they don't earn a paycheck unless they're fighting. So I know they're anxious, and I also know that, they're ready to show the world that, fighting is back and sports are back. And I think it's really interesting that you can have, other sports coming back. Mixed martial arts and combat sports they're leading the way. I think it takes a fighter's mentality to take that kind of risk. And so I applaud Dana White and the UFC, and I'm just honored that Titan FC, my partner Jeff and I, and all of our athletes are able to be kind of part of that very early group. But we're doing it safely with a huge safety plan in place to make sure everybody's safe.
And in mentioning Titan FC, and it is Florida-based, and there have been many shows in South Florida, what did it mean to you when initially Governor DeSantis came out and said, WWE essential business, keep on doing your thing, and then obviously UFC, now they're doing their thing, and they brought it to Florida. How did it make you feel that Florida was sort of a leader in this as well? I know you mentioned UFC being a leader and WWE also being a leader in that regard, but what is it like also that the state of Florida is being a leader in this resurgence?
It's huge, and I really do want to applaud Governor DeSantis as well as Senator Scott Scott and Senator Rubio, because they've really done a great deal to position Florida for a safe return to economic prosperity. At the end of the day, everybody's got to be working in order to, take care of their families. We need to be safe when we do it, but at some point we've got to return to work. And it made sense that sports was leading the way. And, again, I just can't say enough that Governor DeSantis and the senators have exhibited this kind of leadership, because it makes me proud to be a Floridian. It also, gives me hope that we can show the world that you can do this, and you can do it safely, and we'll get back to a smart but normal lifestyle again here very soon.
Lex, in pinpointing May 29th as the return date, was it more you had that in mind a while back as a tentative, or was it when WWE start doing their shows, AEW, another pro wrestling group, start doing shows in Jacksonville, and then UFC returning? Was that then, okay, hey, we got to start looking at a date, let's go, and then May 29th? Or was that something you already had tentatively planned?
No, we had our dates well in advance, so I have my dates for the whole year prior to the commencement of the year. And, that's because I'm broadcast partners with the UFC, so we map out our calendar with them so that, we are not conflicting with them, and we're supporting them in the best way possible, and also they're supporting us in the best way possible. We did initially postpone a date that was April 24th in the Dominican Republic, and we pushed that to May 29th, and my thought was to do April 24th here in South Florida, but, we're at the end of March, and it just became obvious that it wasn't going to happen, and then, the government shutdown started taking effect. So, we had the date, I held it, we were planning on going back to the DR, but once things started, turning and sports became an essential business here in Florida, and there were still governmental restrictions on international travel, in particular, in the Dominican Republic, our partner there, isn't able to get up and running yet, and we get a lot of support from the government there, and this Minister of Sports wasn't able to give us a venue there. So, it's one of those things that made sense to make the change that we made when we made it, and, I'm excited that we get to come back here in South Florida, which is our home, and I think, it truly is the hotbed of MMA globally. We've got some of the best fighters in the world here, some of the best gyms in the world here, and to be able to showcase that is exciting.
Will fans be able to see this on UFC Fight Pass? And what is the relationship between Titan FC and UFC?
100%. Our events will all be on UFC Fight Pass. We've been on Fight Pass for going on 5+ years now, and we're actually in the process of renewing our relationship for another period of time. It's a great relationship. I'm very fortunate. I was able to negotiate that deal for us to become partners very early on, in Fight Pass's history. I think Invicta was the first promotion that was on, and then we followed very quickly as the number 2 and have been a tentpole property for them ever since. I've enjoyed a great relationship with Dana White over the years, and he's been nothing but a gentleman and a really strong advocate for Titan. And, so I'm fortunate, man. When I remember I did our initial interview, I flew to Mexico after we'd agreed on the deal, for the first deal for Titan and to go to UFC Fight Pass. I flew to Mexico just to get a picture with Dana when we signed the contract. And because I knew that would go viral, and it did. And I actually have that picture sitting on my wall now. And took us another very similar picture when we signed our second deal with them. But I remember giving a quote to, I believe it was MMA Fighting, and I said, listen, if I'm going to align myself with anybody in the mixed martial arts world, it's going to be the UFC and Dana White. They're the 800-pound gorillas. I could have delusions of grandeur and say that I'm going to try to take Dana and the UFC on, but the reality is I'm not backed by, at the time, the Fertitta brothers. I'm not backed by endeavor. You know, I mean, I'm a smart businessman. My partner's a smart businessman. You know, we've invested wisely, but we don't have pockets that are that deep. So it makes no sense to try to go head-to-head with them. Why not align yourself strategically and have that 800 gorilla partner that we have in the UFC? So, you know, it's been a tremendous relationship. You know, we've put 80... We just signed Erwin Rivera, who is our 135-pound champion, just signed to the UFC yesterday, and it's fighting on Saturday night. So he is like, I think, our 85th or 86th fighter that has gone to the UFC in the past 4 years. Well over 100 and some odd fighters since, you know, Titan was created.
Your shows are action-packed, and they feature, as you said, young talent working their way up, and then former champions. And is it fair to say that it's sort of like a developmental system?
Listen, it's not only fair, it's accurate. I'm not a guy who has a huge ego. You know, I take pride in what we do. We do it really well. And again, I'm strategic partners with the #1 mixed martial arts organization in the world. I have the ability to text and call Dana White on his personal number and you know, and have him respond, you know, and get back to me right away and work with me on issues. Like, I'd much rather be in that position and say, listen, I've sent, you know, well over 100 fighters to the UFC and made a huge difference in those athletes' career, and my brand is taken all around the world because of that partnership. So I'm in a much better place because I'm partners with them, and I am their quote-unquote farm system, as opposed to, you know, trying to carve out my own niche and be a head-to-head competitor with them and spending more money than we have and not being able to beat them. You know, that would be the reality. You look at what Bellator has done, they you know, Scott Coker, you know, does a good job. ONE is doing a very good job. At the end of the day, they're not the UFC. And they spend a ton of money. And they still are not the UFC. So, humble little me, I'm going to be partners with the UFC, and I'm going to find a way to win by being aligned with them and being aligned with Dana. I will tell you that Dana he gets a lot of grief, I think, from people unfairly. He's one of the most professional businessmen I've ever dealt with. When he gives his word, he 100% executes and does what he says he's going to do. He's never once let me down in that regard. We don't always agree, and negotiations aren't always easy. But once we come to an agreement, and once he says, hey, Lex, I'm going to do this, he does it. Not only does he do it, he really bends over backwards to do it the right way and make sure that I have all the resources that I need to do my job.
Yeah, that's very accurate. Dana White is not afraid to put himself out there, and he's not in it to be political either. So he's going to do what he feels is best. It's so very accurate. It's interesting with Florida, and especially South Florida, because we have so much down here, especially in South Florida. American Top Team, Dan Lambert, Hard Knocks 365, Henry Hoop, and there's others out there as well. But was that something too, because there was so much talent in Florida and South Florida, that you all decided, let's do Titan FC here?
Well, you know what? There was yes, that plays a big part in it, Jim, but I think there's also some learnings that occur. You know, when my partner Jeff and I acquired Titan and started running it, we took it around like the three-ring circus all around the country. And we realized that we didn't need to do that, because every time we went into a new market, we had to really bust our butts to, you know, make sure that we had the right, you know, level of live attendance at the arenas. And sometimes that meant bringing in talent that was local talent that maybe wasn't the level that we wanted, but we had to have them on the card because we knew they'd sell some tickets and help us out in that regard. It was also very expensive to fly people all around the world and you know, from Brazil to, say, Seattle, because we did shows in Seattle and in the Washington State area. You know, just whatever. Like, you know, you need, when you're paying $30,000 in hotels, you know, $30,000 in flights, because you're moving an entire team, housing an entire team, it becomes, you know, a pretty big series of line items. And we looked at it and said, and to my partner Jeff's credit, you know, he kind of broached the idea, and when we crunched the numbers, to train. So I get these great athletes in high concentration that are here, and I'm able to enjoy some really great economic benefit because I'm not dragging, I'm only flying a handful of people in as opposed to, say, 20 people. I'm only, needing a few hotel rooms as opposed to, almost $30,000 in hotel rooms. So it makes our events more profitable, so it means that we can be in business longer. But our product has gotten better because the concentration of talent is so strong here. You get the best person in the world from a certain country. That person will come here to train. So we had Uros Jurosic. At one time, he was, I think he was probably one of the top unsigned welterweight prospects in the world. He was the best guy in Slovenia. I had David Nazarov, who was one of the best guys in Kazakhstan. These guys all came here to train. They wanted to fight, so I could sign them. And I didn't have to travel them in. So from a business perspective, it made a ton of sense. But again, our product got so much better because we weren't obligated to sign like, other regional promotions are. When you go somewhere, you got to make sure you've got the right level of, local attendance. So it's been a great benefit to us to be doing our shows here. But we still do our international shows because that's how we're growing the brand beyond where we are presently.
Has social media picked up for Titan FC during this pandemic?
I think that our level of engagement with our fans has been, really good, and it's something we're working hard to continue to deliver some compelling and interesting content. But I think just the direct interaction has been something that, we've really enjoyed, and working with our fighters to give kind of a, work like Erwin Rivera, who I mentioned earlier, who just signed to the UFC, our bantamweight champion. He did some home workouts for us and gave some ideas on how people could, occupy their time, stay in shape, have a little fun, all that sort of stuff. So we did some initiatives like that were really, I think, well received.
Lex, how did you get involved in MMA?
Long story, but I'm going to give you the thumbnail sketch of it, which was, my background is I have an MBA and a law degree. I was an entrepreneur and, did very well on that. Got into venture capital, was doing that. And this is all after I'd been in the Marine Corps. But 2008, the financial markets crashed, and I had 30 deals that I had invested in that had all gone sideways because the financial markets were just disappeared essentially. And I had negotiated a contract for my father to appear in a commercial that would air on the Super Bowl, and he would do it alongside MC Hammer. The guy I negotiated with is Jeff Aronson. Jeff has been my partner for the past 12 years, partner and very close friend. And he Hammer and I talked during the filming of the commercial about MMA. A few months passed, and I get a call from Jeff. Hey man, I want to start sponsoring fighters with my company. I'm a Marine. I'd also, I'm sitting there trying to figure out what I'm going to do. I just had, a daughter born. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do in terms of work because the financial markets had, gone upside down. And I just said, sure, man. Knew nothing about the business, had no contacts in the business, nothing. But my mentality was, absolutely, we're going to make it happen. I found a way to get to Randy Couture, and I said, Randy, I'm going to give you a really big check. I need you to put this logo on your fight shorts. And he said, absolutely, let's do it. And I did that for a year. And when you're the guy writing checks, everybody in this sport, because it's a very finite group of people in this sport, everybody in this sport, including the UFC, they want to get to know you. And through that process, I realized that there was a real opportunity on in the athlete representation side. It was very much the wild, wild west when Jeff and I got involved. And, Jeff is a very successful entrepreneur, and, I've done well in my own right, tremendous education and a lot of kind of practical experience in, running various companies. So we looked at it and said, man, there's an opportunity to come in and bring a level of business acumen that hasn't been here previously in the sport. And, quickly we had 40 of the top fighters in the world signed to us, and we were partners with MC Hammer because, Hammer actually had represented some really high-level athletes, including Evander Holyfield. So, it kind of worked and made sense. There was, Hammer had some great relationships in the Silicon Valley that we leveraged to bring in some great partners to the sport in terms of sponsors. But he also had a really good insight into how to deal with athletes. And then, let's be honest, he was Hammer, So it was really a very interesting time to be in the sport, and that we did that for about 6 years, and I was starting to get pretty burned out. I was traveling. When you have 40 high-level UFC fighters, and including some champions at the time, like I had Nate Marquardt, who was the Strikeforce champion, we were on the road constantly, and I was gone 3 weeks out of the month, and sometimes 6 weeks straight, and I just was getting really tired, and my kids, I missed a lot of things, a lot of firsts, and I missed all the birthdays and holidays except Christmas, the last year that we really actively were managing athletes. And I talked to Jeff, and he said, "You know what, man, I'm gonna buy a league. I'm gonna buy this organization called Titan, and I want you to run it." And I said, "Man, that's music to my ears," because it requires that I travel some, and I continue to represent some athletes, but I scaled it back a fair amount, and I've been able to enjoy the past 5 plus almost 6 years of being home with my kids and really being active in their lives and being with my wife, and so it's been great. It's worked out, but that's how we ended up in this business. I went from being in venture capital to being in MMA, which I think a lot of people would say that doesn't make sense, and I would agree, but I'll tell you what, it's been a hell of a ride, and I wouldn't have changed anything.
Well, it is another adventure capital. An adventure, at least.
That's right. It's definitely an adventure. I've been to 107 countries total now. Most of them have been because of my involvement in the mixed martial arts world.
Well, a few more questions, and I so appreciate your time in doing this. You mentioned MC Hammer. I'm going to veer off a little bit because that's interesting to me. Are you still working with or involved in any capacities with MC Hammer?
No, but I'm really good friends with Hammer, and I talk to him very frequently. When Jeff and I made the decision to acquire Titan and focus, a great deal of our energy there, we wound down that management company, and so the athletes that I continue to manage, which there's only a handful of guys like Brendan Schaub, even though he's not an athlete, he's a huge podcaster, comedian, entertainer guy now, and I've been with him for almost the entire time I've been in the MMA business. Stefan Struve, a couple of guys that I still work with that I've just had these really long relationships with. But it didn't make sense for us, to continue the professional involvement because the company had wound down. But Hammer and I talk to each other all the time. I still reach out to him for guidance and advice on things, and plus, I just love talking to him. He's such a cool cat, man. And he's MC Hammer, Let's be honest. When your name is Hammer, chances are you're a pretty cool dude.
Do you have a pair of parachute pants?
Not presently, but I'm not going to lie. When I was in high school, I did.
Yes!
I rocked them proudly, man.
That is so great. Yeah, MC Hammer, I'm telling you, not just entertainer, but you're right. What a businessman he's been. And you know what? You mentioned about going through ups and downs. You're an entrepreneur. That's part of being an entrepreneur, going through ups and downs. It's not just all ups.
Yeah, no, 100%. The vast majority of people who have become really successful have failed more than they've succeeded. Because you can't ever truly succeed until you fail. Because you don't learn the lessons necessary. You don't develop the tenacity necessary unless you've been confronted with adversity. Like, I used to never tell people in 2008, after 2008, that, I lost 30 deals and, we were my family was in pretty significant financial duress. And at night, here I am, I have an MBA, executive MBA from Pepperdine, which is like a top 10 school in the world, a law degree, I worked at a law firm, I've been a venture capitalist, I've done all these things, I've been a C-class officer for some time, I did all those things at a relatively young age and enjoyed a lot of success. And my ego early on didn't allow me to understand that adversity was important. I was working at a bar as a bouncer at night, even with all of that background and all of, you know, the things that I had done. I was bouncing in a bar at night, so during the day, I could focus my energy on trying to find, you know, the next appropriate opportunity that would fit kind of what my vision was, my skill sets, my background, you know, all those things. But at night, I was bouncing at a bar, man. You know, and now I tell people that story proudly because it's important for people to understand that bad things happen in life, but if you dig your heels in and, to borrow a phrase from the fighting world, you bite down on your mouthpiece, man, you're going to get through. You're going to be okay, and you're going to come out the other side better for it. And that's, you know, really how I feel because, like, I'm so happy I had the experiences that I've had from, you know, two tours of duty as a Marine in Somalia, which were very difficult times, to the financial problems in 2008, you know, when the markets crashed. Just kind of having to reinvent myself. I'm so happy that occurred because it's the person I am now is because of those things. Like, I feel like I could be a good father. I could be a good role model. I could be a good leader. Talking about leadership from Governor DeSantis and the UFC and Dana White. I'm a better leader because of the adversity I've encountered.
You're a very smart person. You mentioned your degrees, entrepreneur, you have the military background, serving our country proudly, thank you, U.S. Marine. You mentioned you were a bouncer. I'm wondering, did you play sports then growing up, and did you have any interest in becoming a fighter, whether it was boxing or MMA?
You know, I played sports, you know, through high school and into junior college. In high school, I was a three-sport athlete, you know, wrestling, football, track. Actually, I had 4 sports because when I was going to school back east, I played lacrosse and did track simultaneously. And then I went to junior college for 2 seasons and was actually playing football and was actually getting ready to... I had gotten a scholarship opportunity at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, and I went out on my visit, and there was 300-pound dudes that were running 4.5 40s. And I realized chances of me actually playing on the field a lot weren't great. And that was one of those, you know, moments where you have to be honest with yourself. Like, I knew I was tough, and I knew I had a lot of will and determination, you know, kind of like Rudy, you know. But I also knew that I probably wasn't going to be a starter. And even though, like many kids, I had aspirations of, you know, going to the NFL, I just knew I wasn't good enough. And that's a tough thing to swallow, but that led me to the Marine Corps. You know, I ended up not accepting the scholarship. I went to the Marine Corps, did my 4 years of active duty, then got out and went to college and pursued the rest of my dreams. I train with the best fighters in the world. Like, that's not an exaggeration. Like, you know, I train with some of the best fighters and coaches in the world. I love it. I'm passionate about it. But I've never fought professionally.
Did you have a favorite NFL team and an NFL player?
New York Giants, Lawrence Taylor.
Oh, man, you can't go wrong with LT. Greatest linebacker of all time. No disrespect to Dick Butkus or Mike Singletary or any other of the really top linebackers. That is really cool.
He changed the game. He changed the game.
He did change the game. Coach Parcells, everyone knew that. How you played that position, how you played defense. Because Lawrence Taylor was in right. I won't go into the whole story. He was just down here in Miami for the Super Bowl doing media run on Media Row and all, and it was just like everybody just swarmed to LT. It was amazing. Are you a fan of Shark Tank?
Just closing the loop on LT, it wasn't just that he was a great athlete. He had charisma. He understood what it was to be a sports entertainer, you know, and so I think that's why people loved him so much. I mean, yeah, he was wild. He did some crazy things in his personal life, but he let it all hang out there, and he was entertaining on the field and off, which is why I think guys like you and I just thought he was the greatest thing in the world.
And it's interesting you mentioned him about entertaining. He actually had a match at a WrestleMania against Bam Bam Bigelow, part of sports entertainment, and did that and pulled that off. Someone never in the ring was in a huge match on a big stage and was able to do fairly well in his athleticism, and then also entertain. It was, really incredible person and athlete.
Absolutely, absolutely. You asked a follow-on question. I thought, was it Shark Tank?
Are you a fan of Shark Tank?
You know what? I love the idea, right, of successful business people who are investors, who mentor people who have a really cool idea. Because a lot of times, as a innovator or a creator, you've got this great idea, as a young entrepreneur, but you have no idea how to get it to market, or your idea never really makes it to fruition because you take the bumps and bruises along the way that are inevitable, but you don't have the wherewithal in terms of whether it's the funding, the knowledge base, whatever it might be, to make it to that next level. With Shark Tank, if a Mark Cuban or Mr. Wonderful, any of the various characters that are involved, if they believe in you, now all of a sudden you're being mentored by someone who's highly successful and has already made their own mistakes that you can learn from, and you can leverage all of their relationships. So 100%, my partner Jeff is a serial entrepreneur. His wife Carolyn is a highly successful CEO of a company called It's a 10 Hair Care. I talk to them all the time to vet ideas, to get some inspiration, some mentorship, because they've accomplished so many cool things and they have a perspective that maybe I don't have. They're my Shark Tank,
That's a great learning tool. There's also Meet the Drapers. There are others that are now picking up. That's Meet the Drapers I saw it on YouTube, but it's on the internet. I know that. But anyway, I just thought I'd ask you that because of your entrepreneurial background. It was very fascinating because I didn't know that part of it. Okay, we're wrapping this up. Living in South Florida. How do you like living in South Florida? And if I read it right, you have 2 daughters. What would you say to them if they wanted to get involved in sports, especially MMA?
Well, we moved from Los Angeles, and as much as I loved growing up in LA and California, and there's a lot that I do miss about it, being able to get up to the mountains to go skiing and hiking and being at the beach and, even out to the desert, there's so much diversity. Man, you couldn't get me out of South Florida. I love it here. It's been incredible. In my mind, I had South Florida was just a bunch of old people, a bunch of snowbirds, I had no clue. My partner, Jeff, was telling me, he's like, bro, you don't understand South Florida. And, I'm so glad. He's the one who said, listen, I want you to move out. It'll be really good for our business. Because we started the business bi-coastally. He was here and I was out in LA. And he said, please come out here. I agreed. He made it easy for me to do, and we've loved it ever since. We live right across the street from the elementary school, so that my wife or I can walk the kids to school, pick them up. The funny thing is, we have fighters that live at the house. Quite frequently. Stephen Struve lived at the house for 4.5 years. Here you have a 7-foot, 300-pound UFC heavyweight who is essentially my kid's Manny, and he would walk to school to pick them up every day. So we've loved it here. It's been great for us. If my kids wanted to fight or do anything in sports, I would encourage them. I support them to do whatever they want. They both have done jiu-jitsu. They see me training, and they see some of the athletes like Stephen Struve, Shorty Torres, all these guys that have lived at the house with us. They see them train. They go to my fights. They see those. But they haven't really shown an interest besides doing jiu-jitsu in anything for MMA. And they're only 9 and 11, so, there's plenty of time. But they're passionate about gymnastics. My youngest daughter, Kylie, and my oldest daughter, Addison, is passionate about dance. And for them to have something they're passionate about, that they can pour their hearts and souls into and excel in, that's all any parent should ever ask. I wouldn't try to force them to do mixed martial arts, even though I think there's a ton of benefit to it. If they don't have the passion for it, it's a waste of time. And I'm not going to ever, make it where it's something that, if they say, hey, I want to try it, okay, you've got to commit to a certain period of time. My daughter Kylie really wanted to do jiu-jitsu. Okay, well, you got to commit to it. She committed to it for the year. About 3/4 of the way, she wanted to quit because she was thinking she wanted to try other things. I said, well, you made a commitment, so let's finish the commitment. But once you're done, you don't have to go back and do it anymore. And she hasn't, but she got a lot out of that year, and now she's doing gymnastics and loves it. And she's happy. And hopefully that's what she continues to do, and Addison continues to dance. But whatever they decide to do, they come to me and say, Daddy, I want to do this, I'll support it 100%.
Good discipline taught too, Lex. That's a good lesson for everybody to do that. Once you start something, finish it, and then go on to the next thing if you don't want to. You mentioned a couple things. We're going to wrap this up. Snowbirds, no offense to our snowbirds. Lex, avoid Hollywood Beach in the winter. Okay, that's a piece of advice for you. Hey, you mentioned gymnastics and dancing for the daughters, for the girls. Very big down here. A lot of gymnastics and dancing groups down here. Very good at the beginning level, also good at the competitive level, competitions, a lot of fun, so that's really cool. The best part is, you mentioned a 7-foot nanny. There you go, Lex. That's the YouTube series right there.
That's right. The Manny, Stefan Struve. And, it's funny, all my wife's friends would call, like, hey, there's a really big man picking your girls up from school. They're like, oh, yeah, that's Stefan. They're like, who's Stefan? Oh, he fights in the UFC. What? But, you get to know him, and if anybody has ever met Stefan or they've seen interviews with him, he truly is the sweetest person for me. Until you get him in the cage, and then forget about it. But in terms of who he is as a human being, he's incredible, man. He's one of my very best friends. I love him to death. I loved having him live with us for the 4.5 years that he was here. Talk to him every day still, now that he's back in Holland. I've represented him for almost a decade. But yeah, he's a fun story having. And then the other side of it is I now have a guy by the name of Jose Shorty Torres, who is the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of the height, the height thing, to Stefan. He's like 5'2", 5'4", something like that. He's tiny, but the girls love him and get to play with him just as much as they did with Stefan.
Oh, that's so great. I'm biting my hand from laughing because I don't want to miss what you're saying because that's so cool. I'm thinking of 7-footer 5'2". All right, so Titan FC returning May 29th. We'll be in South Florida. Obviously, no fans allowed because of the pandemic, but they're going to be available on UFC Fight Pass. You could see them there, so that'll be really cool. Really good talent, up-and-coming talent, former champions. And in wrapping this up, I noticed Bobby Lashley was an alum of Titan FC, and he's doing very well in WWE. And I noticed, Lex, a lot of crossover, especially within the last few years, between MMA and WWE or professional wrestling, sports entertainment, whatever you want to label it. Back in the day, Ken Shamrock, Dan the Beast Severin, they were about it. But we're seeing more and more crossover. What are your thoughts of the crossover and the appeal of it? Anything that widens the fan base, I'm cool with. I think everybody understands that WWE, professional wrestling, those are real athletes. I mean, they really are. But what they do is scripted. So, it's just a different thing. Mixed martial arts, I believe, when you put two fighters in the cage and lock the door, that is the ultimate truth. Okay? So you will find out, are you tough enough? Do you have the heart? Did you train hard enough? Are you in shape? Do you have the technique? You will find it all out as soon as you get cracked the first time. You'll know where you stand. And so for me, from a competition standpoint, that's incredibly compelling, right? That's what the sports entertainment side misses. But some of those wrestlers, like Brock Lesnar, was able to come over and do really well because they're great athletes. And for the fighters that are transitioning over to wrestling, like Ronda, Kane, some of those folks, listen, man, they've become huge superstars because of fighting. As they progress through their career, fighting is a sport that it takes its toll on you physically. If you can go somewhere else and make millions of dollars and not actually be punched in the face, why wouldn't you do that? So good for them. I applaud them. I think it's good to grow both sports or, both activities. And so I'm a fan of it, man. I believe that you have to do those things. In fact, our main event is a bit of a hybrid. We've got MMA, but our main event on May 29th is featuring combat grappling between Jay-Z Calvin Conte, who was a former Titan champ in MMA and also a former
camp in House Mansfield. So you've got two former Titan MMA champions who are now competing in Titan for a combat grappling title. So a little bit of fun there, mix it up. We get to have that fun of champion versus champion, and they're both high-level guys, so that's going to be fun. So I like the ideas of crossover.
That is really cool, and we're ending this because you spent so much time, and I do appreciate it. Had a lot of ground to cover, and we can do this very quick because there's only 2 more questions. We get them quickly, though. Other athletes, entertainers, have you ever had interest or approach to be involved, or they have approached you to be involved in Titan FC or MMA in some way? I'm thinking, some of the ones I'm thinking, Deion Sanders, Shaq, Undertaker from WWE is a big MMA fan. Mike Tyson, you mentioned Evander Holyfield before, working with MC Hammer. MC was managing his agent and all. Any talks with them or any other entertainers, athletes? Because a lot of them are really into the MMA, but getting involved in a business standpoint?
Yeah, we've definitely looked at, getting a key influencer from another realm involved in Titan, quite a bit. We had great success in our previous business with having Hammer involved. So we're looking for the right, person to get engaged with us. Jeff and I have, several projects we're working on, and we've got several folks lined up that we want to have involved. But it's, you got to be more than just a casual fan. Even if you're a quote-unquote brand ambassador, you've got to be a bit more. So I'm sure we'll be announcing something soon. We've been working on it pretty hard, but I think how about this? You can re-ask the question when we announce it, and I'll even arrange an interview.
That's very cool. Yeah, I would do that. That would be very nice. I appreciate that. And then here's the lastly, Ed McMahon, your father, I'm not going to ask you to do it. Hear my question. Have you ever done the hi-oh before?
You know what? I have, but here's the thing. He did it so well. He was such an amazing guy. He was so cool. I mean, he was part of the Rat Pack. Not many people could say that. People ask me, he was 86 when he passed away. People ask me, do you mourn your father? I say, no. How could you mourn a guy that lived the life that he lived? I miss him. Sure, I miss him every day. I miss him being able to see my girls grow up and all that, for them to get to experience the hi-oh, and in person, hi-oh, to be able to see that. But, man, that's something, even though I just slipped it in there, he did it so well that I really shouldn't be doing it because it doesn't come close to comparing to the way he did it.
That is so great. Thank you for doing that. I really didn't want to. I just wanted to know if you did it, but thanks for doing that anyway. And what your father was also a great businessman. That's something. He did the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. He did Star Search. He did commercials. He did charity work. He was also a great businessman. It's something that the fruit doesn't fall far from that tree.
Well, you know what? He's the one who instilled in me, even though I was adopted, he instilled in me from the moment he and I met that you have to do what you're passionate about in order to be successful. And if you're able to do that, then you'll never kind of worry about how much time and energy you spend on it because you love it. And, so I'm always thankful for him kind of guiding me along those lines. But, he knew that he did hi, how are you really well. Like, that was his job, to be kind of like the quote-unquote second banana, the pitch man, the marketing guy. And so he embraced that. He made that his business. I've been fortunate in that, I learned a lot about being on camera and on the microphone from him. But what I do is I have a keen understanding of sports, and in particular combat sports, and how to leverage that and bring that to the broader market. And I'll tell you, every day I wake up, it's my life. I've got fighters living at my house constantly. I get up and train once or twice a day. I'm at a gym constantly. Like, I'm watching fights constantly. So for me, even though it's pervasive and all encompassing in my life, I don't feel like I work. I feel like the luckiest guy in the world. And so if I can keep that going, then hopefully I'll continue to have success like my dad did.
And that's awesome. And I want to thank you so much, Titan FC COO Lex McMahon, for spending the time doing this. I end it by saying thank you, but I want you to end it with May 29th, Titan FC. Tell us about social media, UFC Fight Pass, just how everyone can get involved, watch it, and also keep up with Titan FC.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jim. All I'll say is check us out on social media at Titan Fighting, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter. And more importantly, tune in to UFC Fight Pass May 29th. You're going to see a great card, 6 amazing fights, headlined by Combat Grappling, JZ Calvin Conte versus Aush Mancillo, 2 former champions, and then a bunch of rising stars coming up, including some great striking matches. So, tune in, and I appreciate all your time.